Hi, folks, with Tacitus Today. Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the decline in IQs and intelligence quotient. So we're talking about the education system generally. Now, this is measuring, there's various articles doing the rounds on social media. Matt Walsh, for example, recently did a piece on this same thing, covering some of the similar stuff I'll be, I suppose, but he's coming at it from a slightly different angle. Now, the claim of these articles is, and these measurements of IQ, is that IQ has declined tragically since the late 1960s, around that time. Some even claim to go back into the late 1940s, some of these examinations of the decline of IQ, but just using the 60s for, so I'm incorporating what's in my lifetime in effect, but the decline is substantial. There was no one who was getting a university degree in the 1960s and 70s who had an IQ. Oh, this is using averages, by the way. But the average was well above 100 for people getting university degrees. And even for students graduating senior high school, or for that matter, junior high school, the IQ standard was if you graduated in a merit-based exam, as not all, but a lot of them were back in the day, then you were you had a higher IQ than people who flunked or dropped out or whatever. So the difference in IQ though is considerable. Now each sort of couple of points of IQ is quite relevant in brain power. The ability to solve complex issues, to understand complex problems, and these sorts of things. So a couple of points, like the difference between, say, 100 and 104, for example, in IQ. That's quite a substantial difference in IQ problem solving type terms. Now, but when you get a difference of, say, average of 112, and the average today for college students in the United States is the benchmark here, is 99. So it's actually dropped below 100. And you think, this is incredible. This is insane. And if you look at, particularly, say, female students, then the decline is even worse. You're looking at that, female students are getting masters and PhDs who have an IQ of 95. And you think, well, that's impossible. But no, it isn't in the current sort of situation we have, where we've got this imposed equity. So I just want to have a why is this happening? And there's quite a few people saying, well, that can't be happening. Why is it? How can it be happening? Higher education, people getting PhDs with an IQ of 95 and so on. So, but the issue is a little bit broader than just straight out decline in quality. And so we need to look at, I think, a number of issues here. Now, even when I was completing a senior or even the latter part of junior high school, already the affirmative action was starting to be talked about and was starting to come in. And I think I've mentioned a number of times that by sheer accident, I got the education was far more rigorous back in the day than it is now, and that's a contributing factor as well. But if you didn't have the school badge in exactly the right position on your your shirt or whatever it was, that if you didn't have it in exactly the right position, you could get detention. Now you're bad, and if you didn't have the badge on, they'd often let that one go, by the way. But if you didn't wear the school badge, then that was definitely detention. And I can't remember whether I had the badge in the wrong place or I didn't have it on that day. Anyway, I got detention this day, and it's a hot summer's day, and the detention class was, or the room we were being held for detention, and I don't know, there were 20 kids or something in there, was right next to the teachers' meeting room, or common rooms, I think they called it. And because it was a hot day, and all the teachers were packed in the room, all the doors and windows were open, and I could hear everything they were saying. And I was sitting right next to the door, so I could, as soon as detention was over, I could bolt out the door quick enough and go running off to the beach. But but they were debating or discussing the affirmative action program of how to create more equity in educational outcomes. That was the subject they were talking about. So the complaint was the boys came first in everything. Didn't matter if it was maths or English or whatever the fuck it was. Boys came first in everything. In fact, it was rare that a girl would even come in the top 10 students. And you're looking at ballpark. I don't know, 150 students per year or something in that order, and so it was very rare that boys just dominated everything academically back in the day. The more exceptional students among the girls were all, later on I discovered, I didn't know at the time, were all lesbians, or became so. But none, and they just seem to be more studious. But this was something that the teachers were debating and saying, well, it's not fair in terms of social equity. It's not fair. It doesn't create an equal society if you have only boys coming first and the brightest boys coming first. They didn't. The more communist, socialist type teachers thought this was a bad thing, and you see this even today. There's a university academic of some repute in Australia got up and wrote a paper which was proudly circulated around the media, the mainstream media, which said that if you have the brightest kids, or students, if we reward the brightest kids with the most prestigious qualifications, such as masters and PhDs, things like that, then that creates an elite of the most intelligent. Now, if the elite of the most intelligent, they have a natural ability that got them there. So they not only have legitimacy in terms of the awards they're given, PhDs, for example, they not only have that legitimacy, they have the legitimacy of real capability, real mental ability, and so on. And that will create a fascist elite, according to this academic. That will create a fascist elite that will oppress everyone else who's not as clever, not as capable, not as bright. So to solve that, or to prevent that wrong, that evil from occurring, according to this academic, if we give everybody a PhD, then it becomes a dictatorship of the most stupid and the dumbest and the most incapable, the most useless that will be in charge. Therefore, they don't have the ability to oppress everyone else because they're too fucking stupid. Therefore, that creates equity. It's if you wanted a sign of madness, that would be it. That sort of rationale being applied. But this was something that the teachers, or some teachers in the room, were actually, and bear in mind, I'm, I don't know, 14 or something at the time, the teachers in the room were arguing. Now, had the debate not been so heated and teachers screaming at each other and accusing each other of being fascists, by the way, had that not been so, I wouldn't have taken any notice of it. And I recognised the voices of some of the teachers that were screaming and shouting. It's only that drew my attention. Otherwise, I'd have just tuned out and drawn doodles on my notebook or something. But because it was so heated and dramatic, I listened, and so I remembered what was going on. Anyway, the upshot of it was they said they took a vote on this, and there must have been enough teachers in agreement with it that they would divide all the subjects at school up into two groups. You'd have the sciences, the STEM type subjects, and you'd have the arts or humanities type subjects. Things like poetry and all that sort of stuff. And so they agreed to divide up the two. They agreed to divide up the two into along gender lines. So the boys would be, the STEM subjects would still be decided on merit, but the arts subjects, the humanities, would be decided on affirmative action, and they would artificially inflate the marks of girls to make sure that they came first in all the humanities. So, and this was viewed as a way to create social equity and all this sort of thing. Now, I didn't understand the terms of social equity at the time. I went on later, reading stuff like the Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital and I don't know, Hegel and or Rousseau and all. Later on, I read those. Didn't read them at the time, and so I began to understand more, or put it into proper framing and perspective. But that was the beginning of, certainly in Australia anyway, that was the beginning of this affirmative action DEI in education, creating these artificial outcomes. Now, at the time, I must have been 15, I think. But anyway, at the time, the schools were quite rigorous. If you were flunking exams, when you turned, I think it was 14 years and 6 months old or something like that, you could go out and you attended school for the minimum amount required, and then you could go out and get a job and become, say, learn a trade or something like that, or become a labourer or whatever. But you could leave school, legally leave school at that point. But if you weren't doing well in the exams or passing, you didn't have to be a superstar student. If you didn't do well in the exams, they effectively ask you to leave. I mean, you're wasting taxpayers' money. You're taking up a spot in the school here. That takes up more of the teacher's time. That teacher's time could be dedicated to more promising and harder working students. Not only are you stupid, but you're lazy as well. You don't give a shit. Why don't you just leave? And that was I'm paraphrasing there, of course, they didn't use those words, but that was how it was. Now, I remember in the end of the third year of junior high school, there was a mass exodus of kids. And this was in a reasonably well-to-do, upper middle class area where parents would have been deeply concerned, most would have been deeply concerned about the kids' education and so on. But there was a mass exodus. I got annoyed sort of at the time because it seemed like all the hot chicks left, and I felt hard done by because of that. But the bottom line is that even in third year, a good quarter of the kids left school at the end of third year. Then at the end of the fourth year of junior high school, there was the junior high school graduation, and if you flunked that, then they would order you to leave. And I think I did like 7 or 8 subjects there. But if you flunked more than 2 subjects, they'd show you the door, unless you were particularly brilliant at 1 or 2 of them or something. But so there was another big clear out. So the kids that started first year high school, I don't think even half of them survived into senior high school. And again, there was another clear out at the end of the first year of senior high school, where if kids weren't doing well in the exams, they kicked you out. So the thing was that only the better students survived into senior high school and then graduated to university. And numbers were quite rigorous. If you didn't get the numbers as an entrance to university, then you just didn't get there. Too bad, And there were kids who, say, wanted to do, I don't know, civil engineering, for example, STEM type subjects, and you had to get a certain grade of mathematics. If you didn't do well in mathematics, I remember a kid. I mean, in fact, he was a buddy of mine. He got the overall mark, like to the minimum. For example, the minimum to get into civil engineering, you had to get, say, 72 or 73%. It was almost like an auction system as well. There was only a certain number of places in civil engineering that were offered, and they would just take the kids that got the highest marks to get in. So even though you might have sort of had a pretty decent mark, if you missed even 1 mark, too bad. And this kid got I think it was enough marks overall, but he didn't get enough marks in mathematics. He was only a couple of marks short of the grade there, so he couldn't get into civil engineering. I remember him being deeply upset by that. But that's how tough it was then. So only the brightest kids were getting through. Now, at around that time, they started introducing the American sociology type degrees, which were all around trying to keep the Vietnam kids off the street or something, but Vietnam protesters off the street in the US. But these courses, sociology courses, only came in sort of later on in the 1970s. There were some of them around, but not many. So the majority of courses, not all, but the majority of courses in university at the time were STEM or classical as in learning classical Greek or classical Latin. So all of these required, like law and medicine and engineering, all of these things required a decent amount of brain power. And if you didn't pass, you didn't get in. But the number of students, the intake to universities at the time, and some of these universities were taking a tenth of the number of students then as they are today, which indicates the expansion of courses, as in the mass expansion of sociology, where nobody fails and any dumb fuck can get into, and any dumb fuck can get a PhD. So these are some of the contributing factors. Kids, even DEI was already coming in, and affirmative action was already, equity outcomes were already starting to come in along gender lines. And later on, they put it in along racial and gender lines, which then fed out all across society. But then the massive sociology courses as well, where rigor was not the issue, whereas ideological capture was an issue. Today in the US, if you say I hate Donald Trump 10 times, they'll give you a PhD, but your IQ may only be 90. So there's vast swathes of dumb kids were being waved through into university, into sociology courses that didn't require as significant or any brain power really to getting African American studies, gender studies, and so on and so forth, and critical cultural studies, for fuck's sake. So this created a different type of student that wasn't there for academic rigor or because they had achieved any academic rigor. So all these things combined. In addition to that, when mass migration started to be a thing, the view all across the West was, how do we integrate these people without them integrating? Because we're bringing in masses of people and they don't want to integrate. Half of them don't speak English. They come from Somalia and some of these places. Their fucking IQ is only 70 anyway. So how do we integrate them quickly when we're bringing them in en masse and they're all living in ghettos and enclaves? I know. This is the sociology type response to this. What we'll do is, when any of these kids come from the third world, so we'll just gift them a junior high school diploma. We'll gift them a senior high school diploma. We'll gift them a university degree. Gift them a government job. Gift them a position of public service. Gift them a political position. We'll give them everything in gift. That'll integrate them. Now, in fact, it had the reverse effect. They're saying, well, if you're giving away all these goodies, it must be because you're weak, because you're just pathetic and weak. That's why you're giving, because we're superior. You're rolling over, like a dog begging forgiveness. You're giving us all these things. So why the fuck should we integrate to a weaker culture? We are the strong culture, and we must be the stronger culture. Otherwise, you wouldn't give us all these things that we don't deserve and haven't earned. So it had the reverse effect of solidifying the non-assimilation attitudes that we see around us today. But if we want to look at why and how IQ declined, it's simple. There's just a lot of dumber people are staying on at school than going on to university, and they're being given affirmative action, DEI, participation trophy type exam results that they could never have got in the meritorious, rigorous education world that certainly I grew up in, and that's the difference. I'm talking about primary school and earlier high school here, but and even later on in high school, boys were still graded on merit, even if girls weren't. But this idea of rigor was certainly a big thing. And it was if you didn't know it, and if you flunked, the teachers would take, back then, the teachers would tell you, okay, you flunked the test, it's not the end of the world. Okay, all it means is you have to work harder. You got to hit the books and you got to work harder, you get a better attitude, apply yourself. That was the approach. You can still come out of this looking good, you can still win, you can still come near the top, but you have to put the work in. And that was a good thing. That's a good thing. But whereas today, okay, you flunked horribly, you got 0 in the exam, but that doesn't matter because you're an oppressed minority, and it's all the fault of those white fascist Nazis anyway. So we'll just give you a PhD as a gift, so you can swan around like you're the same as someone that did work very hard, with high brain power to get. So that's the key, and I think the essential difference, along with those other other issues that I mentioned. You've been with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for listening.